One of the phases we've sort of entered in the internet computer age is, and I say this affectionately, Rick, is the eHarmony stage of pastoral matching. And I know that the eFree Church has a computer service that you can fill out your profile and say where you're at on different issues like gifts or worship and style of worship. Have you found that to be a useful tool? What comments do you have about that approach?
Yeah, we do have an eHarmony, and it's called ministerconnection.net. You can go and access the site. It's open to not just our tribe, but people who fit in our tribe. And you can fill out your side of it, and then there's an interview with you by one of the gatekeepers who is one of our national leaders or one of our 20 district superintendents. They'll meet with you and decide if you're in the big tent. And then the match is open then for you to be matched to a church that's also filling out a profile. I think I saw on TV recently that, 10 or 20% of all marriages now started online. I think that might be about where we are, that maybe 10, maybe 20% of the matches that we have in the Evangelical Free Church can be tracked back to this website or some other one that's very similar to it. There's other websites out there, for instance, like Gordon Conwell has a website where they openly post all the job requests that come into them. So there's all kinds of different approaches this way. And, you know, we're in a high-touch, high-tech world. There's a high-tech side of things, and there's a high-touch side of things. I think we are living with both, and each of them have their strengths and weaknesses.
I'm passionate about biblical preaching, and I surveyed all the resources I could for pastoral search committees, pulpit nominating committees, and they had almost nothing to say about what you should look for in preaching. In fact, a lot of them explicitly downplay preaching. They say there's a lot more to being a pastor than preaching, and you ought to look for other things. And I mean, I couldn't believe it. Even one denominational publication that I read, I won't mention which denomination, Mark, but it said the only suggestion it had about evaluating preaching is rate the sermon on 10 things: use of humor, physical appearance, level of interest, and one of the 10 was use of scripture. Divide those by 10, and that's what you should score them on preaching. Another book I read suggested how you should go incognito to visit a church when you're looking for a pastor. You know, don't all sit together, spread out, that kind of thing. I would highly recommend to churches looking for a pastor that they read 9 marks of A Healthy Church, and the first mark is expository preaching. But I think you have more about that.
I've been thinking about writing a little booklet called How to Find a Pastor, Guidelines for the Search, in which, but my problem with it, Chris, maybe you can help me with this. My problem with it is I've set it up all negatively, and I don't know that's going to sell well. You know, my inner sarcasm just comes out too much, so I got to pop it around and make it positive somehow.
It's you guys that
negative version,
you
though.
spend
We want to
time
hear
in
that
the
this
UK.
morning.
You spend time in the UK. I mean, it's like Alistair. It just oozes out, right?
Yeah, maybe so. Well, you know, one of the things I would say is that you got to realize that if churches were healthier, you'd never need to read a book like this. The last guy would have taken care of this before he left. Indeed, you would have realized that having the last guy help you take care of this was one of the most important parts of his ministry. So I would say the preacher is to prepare the congregation for the next guy. And then I have 8 chapters suggested, which I'll happily summarize for you if you want me to. They're called Enemies in View. Number 1, denominational leeches. Positive lesson, consider the self-interest of those who recommend. You know, I mean, there can be godly employees of denominations. You know, I'm sure all of us have worked for denominations one time or another. And, you know, but there can be, I have certainly experienced in Baptist life, guys who get a denominational paycheck, and what they want to make sure of is that your church keeps sending your money into their organization. They're not thinking of you surviving as a gospel-preaching congregation. They're thinking of you continuing to be a part of their organization. So take that into view. Number 2, proud businessmen who hire a preacher for their church. You know, when your congregation is full of that, they'll go hire a preacher. God calls pastors, and he gives them to churches as gifts. The elders lead the church. Number 3, pastoral failures who don't lead in finding a good successor. Positive lesson, it need neither be self-aggrandizing nor nepotistic interference for a pastor to lead the congregation in one of the most monumental decisions it will make. I know there are ways we can abuse our influence, but if we really love that particular congregation, there are ways we can work for their health. Number 4, here's one of the most common ones, tournament hosts who want only the best for their church. Positive lesson, it is proud to think you need to have a good pastor who is better than other good pastors. Look one at a time for a brother that could serve you well. This is not a beauty pageant. Yeah, these are all brief. Number 5, ageists. Positive lesson, God raises up young men who watch their life and doctrine closely and are gifted to teach his word publicly. Hire them when they're a cub. Let them chew things up around the house for a while, and you'll have a lion that loves you for life. Number 6, resume lovers. And I had 300 rather than 200. 300 anonymous resumes rather than a reference from a trusted pastor. Positive lesson, find a church you like with a pastoral ministry you like and approach the pastor for a suggestion. Pursue that person until you're certain he would not be good. You'll save yourself a lot of time and energy. 7, stealers of successful pastors from other churches, which just encourages ladder climbing. I can't tell you how many phone calls at 9 Marks we've gotten like this over the years. Positive lesson, why do we think God loves our congregation more than the one we would take this pastor from? Why are we being so secretive? Does this suggest that something may be amiss? Do you know where your spouse is right now? That is, where was your pastor preaching last weekend? I had a pulpit search committee call me one time and tell me they were going to come up and, you know, look over. And I told them I wasn't interested, that I'd pray for them and give them advice. But they said they were going to come anyway because they didn't really believe me. I said, well, that's fine, but if you come, we will pray for you in the morning service. And they thought I was joking. Well, it got time for the pastoral prayer, and I said, and today we have with us the pulpit search committee, and I called out the name of the church from such a church. Would you all please stand? So I had them stand, and they had scattered around a little bit, you know. So I had them stand, and I just said, we are so thankful for this church and its ministry. We're going to be praying for them to find a good pastor. Let's do that now. Please, if you see them after the service, please speak to them and assure them of your prayers. You know. Number 8, MDiv requirers. Really? Have you seen how many people out there have MDivs? Yeah, I just completely don't believe that an MDiv is necessary to be a good pastor.
But pushing back, or not pushing back, but balancing the one about, what did you call Rick?
I did not call him that.
Okay.
No, I merely said that being hired by a denomination is not God's call of approval on your life.
I think maybe the biggest challenge church is looking for, and you agree with this, I think, is they're too self-sufficient. They don't really even want help from anywhere else. They search for a pastor once every decade, and then they get in this transition, and they think they know it all. They don't need help from the presbytery. They don't need help from other pastors. I mean, have you found that to be the case, Lig?
You see everything under the sun in the Presbyterian Church in America, whereas some churches will pursue a pastoral search exactly the way you would hope they would do it, in terms of connecting with other people that know a person well, can commend character, doctrinal commitments, all the way over
to...
to...
that happens very often, though?
That it's done wrongly?
No, that it's done well.
Oh boy, it's hard to say. Yeah.
I certainly see a lot of churches that I do think are done well. I think there are a lot of churches that, a lot of the stuff I think we're talking about is kind of intuitive, you know, and you can just, I mean, if you've ever been on a pulpit search committee where you get flooded with 300 resumes and you don't know any of these people, it just makes sense. Why don't you call Tom? You know, he teaches at the seminary. He knows a lot of guys. Or there was a guy who used to be in our church who we really love, who's now doing this. You know, maybe he would be interested. I think common sense will often prevail over just a kind of mindless resume love.
Rick, do you find the churches you work with are generally open to input, or are they more kind of arm's length?
I think there is improvement in terms of openness. Your book is now available. There's a number of good books out there on pastoral searches. There are people that have HR background, and not that that's a secret, but I mean, they've been through the process of what does it look like to look carefully at a potential person. The source of resumes, I think, just the opening up to everything off the internet is not really that great of an idea. I think it's much more about going to people you trust and asking them for some recommendations. That's why that sponsor role is so important, because people that are broadly networked really do want to sponsor people who are ready for the next step, and they really believe in that person, and they'll give a good recommendation. And I think search committees are more and more attuned that way. One of the big trends now that we're seeing is a church of 300-400 paying $30,000 to a search firm. And then the search firm turns right around and contacts everybody that they should have contacted and talked to. They're actually doing that, and then they're taking people through a very careful HR process. So I'm not against search firms, but I am against churches just kind of delegating it to them and getting rid of the responsibility and thinking that an outside group is going to do it. I've watched churches spin for 2 and 3 years and still not finding a person. And I've seen other ones find just the right one because their network was broader. So I think that search committees are getting wiser. There is more help out there. And I'm seeing healthier searches by and large, especially if they'll talk to the right people, as Mark was emphasizing.